Welcome to Real Estate School. Today, we're going to be covering 10 more tricky questions that you might see on your real estate licensing exam. So let's get started. Okay, our first tricky question for you today, and remember, it's all in the wording. A man's house has been listed for sale for more than 1 year, and he is very anxious to move into a retirement community. A real estate professional who is a sub-agent of the seller tells a prospective buyer to make a low offer because she is sure that the seller will accept it. Regarding the real estate professional's conduct, which of these is false? So we're looking for the statement that is incorrect. Which one of these is false? Well, hopefully, the first thing you've recognized here, it should have jumped out at you. The real estate professional is a sub-agent of the seller. And what does this mean? The real estate professional has a customer relationship with the buyer. The buyer has not hired any agent to represent them. Therefore, at this point, the buyer's representing themselves. And if the buyer's representing themselves, this means that the real estate professional is in a capacity of being the listing agent's assistant. The real estate professional is the sub-agent of the seller, representing the seller in this transaction. So the answer? She acted appropriately to sell the seller's property. A. The real estate professional's conduct is not appropriate because she violated her fiduciary duty to the seller. A sub-agent owes the same fiduciary duties to the principal as the agent. She may have implied she was representing the buyer, and she made assumptions that may or may not be true regarding the seller. Our next question. A woman owns 50 acres of land with 500 feet of frontage on a desirable recreational lake. She wishes to subdivide the parcel into saleable lots, but she wants to retain control over the lake frontage while allowing lot owners to have access to the lake. Which of these types of access rights would provide the greatest protection for a prospective lot purchaser? Well, the reason we're asking this question is we want you to understand this term, appurtenant easement. This means that language is written into the deed that the buyer receives for their individual parcels. The language says ownership of this parcel also includes access to the lake. Once that's put into the deed, now it's going to transfer with ownership forever. So that would be the buyer's best protection. So the answer, again, is an appurtenant easement. An appurtenant easement is annexed to the ownership of one parcel and allows the owner the use of the neighbor's land. The easement transfers with title and so provides the greater protection for a prospective purchaser. Our next question. 3 brothers bought a farm together, and the deed listed only each of their names. What form of ownership are they presumed to have taken? Well, we have obviously a co-ownership arrangement here. 3 brothers are buying a farm together. And if that's the case, that's going to rule out answer D in severalty, because that's ownership by one person. And A is tenancy by the entirety, and that's co-ownership between a married couple. So that leaves B and C. Joint tenancy with rights of survivorship or tenancy in common. Well, the key phrase to recognize in this question is that the deed listed only each of their names. Joint tenancy is a special form of co-ownership that includes rights of survivorship. And what that means is when one of the co-owners passes away, their interest is automatically absorbed by the other co-owners. As they say, essentially there's just one less owner that owns the entire property. Their interest cannot be passed through their will. It's absorbed by the other co-owners. Well, in order to have that type of co-ownership arrangement, we have to have special language put in the deed. The deed has to state joint tenancy with rights of survivorship. And the question did say the deed listed only each of their names, so the only possible answer here is tenancy in common. C. Moving on. Question number 4. A buyer decides that she would like to have a shed in the backyard removed. Her original offer to purchase was accepted on October 1st and is now October 15th. She will need to have her buyer agent. Well, let's recognize this. This buyer is already under contract. We have already agreed to terms. After the fact, now the buyer decides that she would like to have the shed in the backyard removed. Well, there's two terms really that we want you to recognize here: amendments and addendums. Here's the way I like to think of it. An amendment normally takes place before we're under contract. As we're going back and forth, making offers and counteroffering, we amend one person's offer. We make a change to the wording of the contract, and all parties must initial the change. But this is done on normally done on the contract itself as we're negotiating back and forth. We amend the terms of the contract. All parties initial the change to recognize the change of the agreement. That's an amendment. When I think of an addendum begins with the word add, because that's what we're doing here. We're adding to the contract that's already in place. Addendum is to add. This is done on a separate form. We're not going to modify the contract that we already have. We're going to add to that contract on a separate document. Now, this separate document we tie to the original contract. The addendum would normally start off with generic wording that says this addendum becomes part of the purchase agreement for this property between this buyer and this seller, written on this date. Buyer and seller agree to the following. The buyer's agent's going to write in there to the addendum now: seller to have shed in backyard torn down and removed before closing. The buyer will sign the addendum. It'll be submitted through the buyer's agent to the seller's agent to the seller. If the seller agrees to this addendum and signs the addendum, it has now been added to our contract. This was done on a separate form. An amendment is a change that normally takes place as we're negotiating. That change takes place on the contract itself, where an addendum is an addition to a contract that's already in place. Okay, our next question, number 5. Which of these parcels of land is the smallest? Well, I guess you have to know your info to begin with. 2 sections. If you recall from the government survey method, a township is made up of 36 sections, and each section is 1 square mile. So 2 sections would represent 2 square miles. And answer B is 2 square miles. Oh, by the way, how big is a square mile? 640 acres. So if we have 1,280 acres, we have 2 square miles. Question A, B, and C are all 3 the same. Answer D, 5% of a township. Well, just doing this in our heads, we can figure a township is 36 square miles. 10% of a township is 3.6 miles. 5% of a township would be 1.8 miles. That's our answer. Our answer is D. Question number 6. A real estate broker announces to the firm sales associates that the top selling sales associate each quarter will receive a $1,000 bonus. This constitutes an The offer of a bonus to the top selling sales associate each quarter is an express contract because the broker clearly stated the offer to the sales associates. Express, as derived from the word expression. It is a unilateral contract because the broker is obligated to keep the promise, but the sales associates are not obligated to perform. In a unilateral contract, only one party is obligated to perform. We have an express unilateral contract. A purchase agreement would be an express bilateral contract. Okay, moving on to question number 6. A parcel of property was purchased by two friends. The deed they received from the seller at closing transferred the property without stipulating a form of ownership. The two friends took title as which of the following? Well, I think we made this point earlier. Two friends are buying a property together. This is either going to be joint tenancy or tenancy in common. And the deed they received from the seller at closing transferred the property without stipulating a form of ownership. Joint tenancy requires special wording. Without that wording, we have a tenancy in common. The answer would be B. Our next question, question number 8. A person approaches an owner and says, "I'd like to buy your house." The owner says, "Sure." And they agree on a price. What kind of contract is this? Many times students will answer implied, but this is not an implied contract. The terms were clearly stated. "I'd like to buy your house," and the owner says, "Sure." D, no contract, is not accurate because verbal agreements are valid. The answer here is unenforceable. The parties may like to do business this way and proceed to carry out their oral agreement. There is no law against it. However, under the statute of frauds, an oral agreement for the sale of real property is unenforceable. When we use the term unenforceable, can the agreement be enforced in court? Verbal agreements are valid agreements. They just don't hold up in court. If you and I had an agreement for me to buy your home, and I backed out a verbal agreement, and I backed out the day before closing, you could not take me to court and force me to perform like you could with a written agreement. Question number 9. Which statement most accurately describes special assessment liens? Here's a good tricky question for us. Well, we talk about this many times. Normally from a foreclosure sale, the property is auctioned off. From the proceeds of the auction, they normally would settle the city taxes first. Taxes and special assessments. Special assessments are special fees charged by the city or county government to make an improvement that only benefits a specific property. The city's going to come into your neighborhood and install street lights or sidewalks. That might even increase the value of the homeowner's properties. Well, instead of taking the money out of the general tax funds, they could bill the homeowners, in addition to their regular annual property tax, an additional amount as a special assessment. Again, from a foreclosure auction, taxes and special assessments get paid first. Therefore, the answer would be C. They take priority over mechanics liens because they always get paid first. Okay, one more question for you. The process by which government takes control of property after the owner dies without a will or lawful heirs is? We've talked a lot in the past about seeing the word process in a question regarding eminent domain. If you get the word process in the question regarding eminent domain, the answer we're looking for is condemnation. But that's not the question here. This says the process by which the government takes control of property after an owner dies without a will or lawful heirs. In this case, the answer is Escheat, A. If an owner dies without a will or any heirs, real estate escheats to the state in which the person resided.